inside your mind where thoughts divide and mysteries unwind. Join us every Monday evening right here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And you will catch the Fenton Perspective with our great host, Lorian Fenton. Come listen in as she shares her amazing stories from the past to present, along with all of her guest secrets to the future. That's the Fenton Perspective every Monday evening right here from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, only on Revolution Radio. Oh, and you don't need to expect us. We're already here.
Extendivite really works. Just listen to what some people have to say.
Several years ago, I was developing a very severe situation. I called it my flippy heart. It was doing not good things, and I did not want to go to a medical doctor because I just knew they would give me a cover-up pill. I didn't want to get onto that sort of thing at all. When I learned it was garlic and cayenne, and cayenne is a healer. It is a wonderful herb. I said, I think I'm onto something here. I'll tell you, I wouldn't be without it. It did wonderful things for me.
Extendivite is only $69.95 for a 2-month supply of either capsules or liquid. Call now. That's 1-877-928-8822 or visit heartdrop.com.
Extend your life with Extendivite.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Aloha and welcome to Stargate to the Cosmos on Revolution Radio. I'm your host, Janet Carol Lessin, with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Alex Lessin. Our producer is Thomas Becker, also known as Mad Painter, and our guest is Stephen G. Post, Ph.D. And his newest book is God and Love on Route 80, The Hidden Mystery of Human Connectedness. And this is a story, a remarkable true story of faith, love, and destiny for everyone on a spiritual journey. Having hitchhiked across Route 80 from Pennsylvania to San Francisco, based on a premonition, a 17-year-old boy, which was Stephen G. Post, saw a youth leaning over a ledge of the Golden Gate Bridge, ready to end it all. Curiously, this was not his first encounter with the stranger in San Francisco. The boy had had a recurring dream of this moment back in St. Paul's School in New Hampshire. At that moment, Post realized that he and his youth had been brought together for a reason, to save each other. Their meeting was not luck, but graceful synchronicity, one of an uncanny series of events that could only be the work of a creative mind. This encounter set the stage for the rest of his life, a path connected by synchronicities which Post perceived as guidance from God and proof of humanity's fundamental oneness. And there's more information on this book on aquariumradio.com. I have a show page and I have pictures of Stephen Post. But before we bring on Stephen, I want to make sure we have Dr. Sasha with us. Hi, sweetheart. Are you there?
Yes, I am. And I'm Stephen, I'm really interested in hearing what you've got to say, because it's been one of my dilemmas. Is it that I, in my mind, see how things are connected in retrospect, or were they connected anyway? Or if I just do it in my mind, where's my mind? And so it raises a lot of questions like that. Was it the of my second wife leaving me so I got to be with Janet, or is that my rationalization of what actually occurred? And so your story brings all those things up for me, so I'm eager to hear it.
Yes, it does. Let me know when.
Go ahead. I want you to start. So take it away, Stephen, and tell us about this incredible journey you've been on, I guess, all your life, and your synchronicities. Because I'm very curious. My whole life is a series of synchronicities. I'm sure many people feel the same way or have the same realization. So we're really curious how you've connected the dots and rationalized it and had it made sense in your life as proof, as guidance from God. Yes. Take it away.
I will do so. So thanks for having me on, by the way. It's a delight, Janet and Sasha and Tom.
You're welcome.
So I was a 15-year-old boy at a boarding school in New Hampshire, really a bit of a pricey orphanage, I guess. It was called St. Paul's School in Concord. I was up there enjoying life, being a good student, staying out of trouble, and I began to have a series of recurring dreams. This was a single dream that recurred about 6 or 7 times. I was waking up in the morning feeling like I'm not sure if I'm asleep or, in fact, awakened, kind of in a world of betwixt and between. And I had this vision of a silvery gray mist. And lo and behold, it was high up. It was somewhere out in the west. That was my intuition. And I looked to my left and I saw the outline of a blonde youth with stringy hair. And he was leaning out on a ledge about to jump. Then all the silver and mist turned to blue, and the face of an angel appeared. I was not a believer in angels by any means. And in a soft, feminine voice said, "If you save him, you too shall live." Now, St. Paul's is kind of like Harry Potter scene. It's a really beautiful place with all kinds of old chapels and school buildings. I would go to the old chapel and meditate a little bit on this surprising dream. I did a lot of studies there with everyone else. We had required sacred studies. We studied world religions. I was a big fan of Emerson and his idea of the oversoul, a kind of connecting mind that is not just derived from matter, but has its own independent existence, and that we all participate in some very powerful and mysterious way, connecting us in uncanny moments of synchronicity, of premonition, of intuition, and so forth. And I was probably the only person up there who actually believed in the oversoul. Most of my friends appreciated Emerson as literature. And so I would talk about this dream in my class. I had a wonderful Episcopal priest named Rod Wells, who was my teacher, and he was a big fan of Alan Watts, the Buddhist out on the West Coast. So Rod was so intrigued with what you might call just my adolescent spirituality, which can be very powerful, and sometimes adults don't realize that. He was a graduate of Yale Divinity School in New Haven. So one evening we decided that we would go the next day to a class at Yale Divinity School, and I would present my dream to a lot of students who were training to become ministers. These were MDiv students, Masters of Divinity students, in the class of a famous Jungian on the faculty there by the name of James Ditties, D-I-T-T-E-S. That next afternoon we were there on Prospect Street, and I gave them my dream. I told them about my dream, and they asked me, what did it mean? And I said I wasn't exactly sure. Sometimes I thought maybe I just conjured it up, that it was just something I fabricated. It had no objectivity. It was just me making meaning because somehow underneath all of our happiness is this quiet desperation. We're looking for meaning, and we're worried about the world being empty and our souls being empty. So I was clear that I wasn't sure if this was objective or subjective, but it felt objective. It felt like I was really being called and lured to the West. And in fact, they were surprised because I said I was the only St. Paul's student who'd ever applied to Reed College in Portland, Oregon. That was just not something that Paulies did. They were all pretty much East Coasters or going elsewhere, but not up to the Northwest. And so people were surprised, and they talked with me about the dream, about what it meant. And I gave them some ideas about that, but I really wasn't sure. And after this really beautiful 2-hour conversation, I walked over to the Yale Chapel and played some classical guitar, Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring. There was a little service, and we went back to Concord. So life continued on. I graduated from St. Paul's, and I was bound for Swarthmore, a college in Pennsylvania. But here's what happened. So there was a family argument, shall we say. Rod Wells had gotten me a job tutoring kids in the Bronx, which was something I really wanted to do. I'd done it up in New Hampshire with the French Canadian kids from out in the countryside. And my parents put their foot down. They said, you can't do that because the Bronx is too dangerous. So we had a significant argument for a few days, and ultimately my mom said, well, we won't pay for Swarthmore if you insist on this. And finally I relented, and I said, well, what am I going to do this summer? And my dad, who was the president of W&J Sloan's furniture store on Fifth Avenue, he knew all the lampshade factories, all the furniture factories across greater New York. And he said, I can get you a job at Bill DeBono's lampshade factory. Just what I needed. Okay. Perfect fit, really, not seriously. And so I spent 2 weeks working in Patchogue, New York, in a very hot, sweltering lampshade factory with no air conditioning between two very nice, large Italian women. And I was cutting the cardboard. And I did this, reliably. And I did, I guess you could say a good job. And Bill DeBono would walk around with his big cigar and supervise me. But after a couple of weeks, it was just the end. This was not my thing. And so my dad had a gray Mercedes 190, and it wasn't in the best shape. It was probably 5 or 6 years old. And I think he kind of bought it so that he could drive us up to this fancy prep school, or drive me up and look good. So I would drive that car to the lampshade factory. My parents had another family car. And then Friday night I drove out to West Hampton Beach, which is a kind of a hangout town for young people on the South Shore of Long Island out toward Montauk Point. I had a couple of friends from school. I had a gal friend out there. And I just felt I'm just not going to do this anymore. I'm going to follow the dream. Of course, the dream was a pull. It was a lure, but I also had a push. I don't think without the push I could have followed the dream. The push was I wanted to escape Bill DeBono's lampshade factory pronto, So about 11 at night. Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah.
I'm just agreeing. I understand. We need to pull and to push. Yeah.
Yep. So about 11 at night, I just said to my friend Libby Sutro and Lee Conklin, I said, I'm going west. I don't know where. I don't know how. I had $50 in my pocket. I'd been reading Siddhartha. I'd been looking at lots of interesting kinds of journey books, including a little Kerouac and so forth, and who was also from Long Island, from Hempstead. And so I just drove west. I drove west on the Sunrise Highway. I drove through the Midtown Tunnel, drove up the FDR Drive. I drove across the George Washington Bridge, which gets you into New Jersey. Now, I'd never driven west of the George Washington Bridge.
Wow.
There were two ways I could have gone. There was 95 south, but there was 90 west. And in the dream, I just knew I was going west, so I drove west through the Delaware Water Gap into Pennsylvania, and about 5 a.m, I was having doubts about what I was doing. I was thinking, this is a little bit extreme. Maybe I can do a U-turn over the Midway and, just kind of drive back, and no one will ever know any of this happened, and my reputation will be untarnished forever. But lo and behold, just as I was about to do that, the generator broke. Now, back then, cars had generators. And if the generator failed, the entire electrical system was just gone. And that's what happened. There were no lights. The engine wasn't running, and I was able to get off on the right-hand shoulder of the road. Now, for you Pennsylvanians, there I am. Yes. It's near Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, or Milton, Pennsylvania, about halfway through the state. And there is nothing to be. It's about 5 a.m. All I can see is in the very early dusk, I can see wheat fields for miles and miles and miles. There are no telephone booths. There's no towns, anything. And I did the only thing that a kid would do. I wrote a note on a piece of paper that I pulled from the glove compartment, and it said, to the Pennsylvania State Police, please return this car to my father's name, and then 44 Davison Lane, West Islip, New York, 516-669-5655, from his son, who no longer works in the lampshade factory.
That's great. What year was this? I'm curious.
This would have been 1969, the summer of 1969. And,
okay, that's a wonderful, most awesome summer ever. So we're with you. We're on this journey.
Well,
okay.
Yeah, well, that's what happened. And so I had my classical guitar. I played Villalobos and Granados, and I was a pretty decent guitarist. And I had $50, and I had a few odds and ends of clothes and a couple of books, including Huxley's The Perennial Tradition. And I stuck my thumb out. A big, huge white truck came by. A guy swung that door open, and he said, "Jump in, I'm heading for Chicago." So I said, "Sure will." And I got in, and he was dressing country and western. His name was Gary. And we talked about what I was doing out there. He suggested that maybe I should call my mother. I said, not yet. And he did drop me off in Chicago. I spent a couple of nights playing guitar on the benches in Grant Park. And then I got a ride with sort of a van full of hippie types going out west towards San Francisco. And when we got to Route 80 runs through Nebraska. And, we went through Omaha, we got to Lincoln, and then one of these really nice young ladies said to me, you should really call your mom. And I said, all right. So they pulled over, and I went to a phone booth, and I called Collect. And it was my mom picked up. She said, oh, my God, you're alive. We can call off the Pinkertons. Those are the detectives.
Oh, my God.
And I said, Mom. Yeah. What did you do? You called the Pinkertons? Are you crazy? That was not good on my part. And she said, look, we got the car. It's in the shop being serviced. We got it towed back to New York. And we realized that we were a little out of line. We probably should have let you do your tutoring in the Bronx. I said, I think that would have been good, Mom. And then she said, so where are you going? And I said, I'm headed for San Francisco. And then she said, well, where are you going to stay? I said, well, do you have cousin George's address? So I had a cousin, George Lamont, who had done 2 tours of duty in Vietnam. The second one was in Laos. He was part of that Vietnam vet subculture in the Mission District. He lived at 4 Chenery Street. So I went to George's. I spent the summer there. And on the corner of Chenery and Market Street was a Nichiren Shoshu Buddhist community, which I really liked. I joined that organization. I chanted Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, and there was an old Japanese American who'd been interned. He was actually originally from Hawaii during the war. His name was Gus, And Gus and I would go to these Hispanic restaurants across the Mission District, and I would play music, and I earned enough money to sort of make ends meet, and all was good until I drew a bad draft number, and it looked bad. Yeah, that I actually so I'd gotten in to read, but I turned them down to go to Swarthmore. And what happened was I called the people at Reed. I mean, I liked the idea of Reed because Robert Bly was up there as the poet laureate, and there were some really interesting folks up there. So I called them up. I said, look, I know I turned you down, but would you please open up a spot for me because I don't want to go to Vietnam? And they said, yeah. So early September, about 7 a.m, we have a going away event at the Nichiren Shoshu Temple. Gus is there. They give me a Gahon Zone, which is a scroll that gives you good luck, and it's got all kinds of deep statements about the universal mind and karma and being one. It's a very powerful symbolism. So I had my Gahon Zone, and I was supposed to keep it for the rest of my life. And I took the Market Street bus to Golden Gate Park. I went across the park on foot, and that's where you actually step onto the Golden Gate Bridge. I'm walking across the bridge. Now it's early in the morning. It's a really heavy gray, silvery mist. I get about halfway across the bridge on the left where there's a pedestrian walkway. And then there's a kind of a waist-high railing. And on the other side of the rail, I could only see about 3 or 4 feet in front of me. But I just made out the image of a blonde-haired youth who kind of looked a little bit like what I had seen in my dream. So I looked over at him, and he was looking down over the waters. And I said to him, "Are you planning to jump?" And he turned around, and he looked at me, and he said, "And what's it to you? And no one can stop me," and those kinds of things. And then he actually quoted Macbeth very effectively, looking out over the depths, that life is empty nothingness. And I said to him, you do that really well. And in fact, it sounds better and more realistic when you're out there on a ledge than it did at Memorial Hall when we used to do it at St. Paul's. And so we got into a conversation. I told him, I honestly think, I'm not sure, but I think I may have come out here and all these things may have happened so that I could encounter you on this bridge. And I engaged him very well. I told him, look, I had this dream, and I heard this voice, and I had this argument with my parents about working in Bill DeBono's lampshade factory, and I drove the 190, the Mercedes across Pennsylvania, and it broke down at just the right moment. And I thought, maybe that was synchronicity. By the way, a few months later, I would be taking a course on Alchemy 101, which is a combination of quantum theory and the history of medieval science. Okay, so these things were interesting to me. And I said, I really think I'm here to encounter you. And as we were talking, the silver mist began to evaporate, and there was more blue in the air as it was being burned away. And I said, look, if you come over that ledge, I will give you a Gahon Zone, and this Gahon Zone will bring you luck all the rest of your life. And he said, I don't believe that at all. And I unrolled it a little bit, and I explained some of the symbolism. So I said, look, if you want any more of this, you've got to come over the ledge, and I'm going to give this to you, but there's going to be a condition to it. So he finally said, okay, I'll come over. And he stepped over the railing, and he walked over to me, and I explained the symbols on the Gahon Zone. I told him, look, I'm going to give this to you, but on one condition. You have to walk down the Golden Gate Bridge toward the park. You have to walk across the park, get the Market Street bus to Chenery Street. And then you have to go to my cousin George's. And I left him I wrote a note. It said, "Dear George, this is Harry. Please let him sleep on the same spot on the floor where I slept and bring him to the temple so he can meet Gus. Gus will take care of him." So he actually did that. I learned this later at Thanksgiving when I come down from Oregon to San Francisco for a week or so. And after about 3 weeks, Harry had kind of gotten it together and he went home to North Carolina. Now, I never saw him again, but that was what happened. And at any rate, as I was walking down now I'm walking north on the bridge. Harry walked south. I walked north because I'm going to hitchhike up to Reed. I had this incredible feeling that somehow, synchronicity, which is Carl Jung's term, for these uncanny sort of impossible possibilities where, you just meet this perfect person at the perfect time for the perfect reason. And it seems so set up, if I can use that term, kind of set up by the universe, that it's not just random. You'd really be stretching it to explain this by probabilities. And plus, I had seen this individual, at least in outline form, in my dream. So suddenly I was filled with this excitement because I understood that there's something about mind that is beyond locality, that goes beyond this particular place or brain and cells and so forth, that there's a kind of universal mind and consciousness in which we participate, because only that could explain how I could meet Harry on a bridge, having had a dream about a year and a half before then. And all these events had occurred and there it was so perfect. So that was sort of episode one. The book is it's not really a memoir. It's an episode of a series of episodes of synchronicity. And I'll give you one more just to.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So
before we go to the next one, let me say, Sasha, did you have a comment or a question or anything? We're going to go to episode 2.
No, it's just, it's what it seems to me is that you were free of temporality. You might have even been, if you're free of temporality, you may have seen the future and be going back to it. That would be an alternative explanation.
Well, that's true. And, you mentioned earlier that there, are these things objective and real, or are they subjective? Because the existentialists say we are all meaning-making creatures first and foremost, and we can't get very far without meaning. I guess that's Viktor Frankl's point. But
it's a spurious dichotomy.
It really is.
That we can embrace both.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wasn't sure, when I had that dream, and I would think about it and talk about it in sacred studies, and I discussed it with the Yale Div students, and I was a pretty young guy at the time. But I was pretty ahead of the game in terms of philosophy and world religions. And I would walk around New Hampshire. One of my friends, Ned Perkins, whose grandfather Malcolm Perkins was F. Scott Fitzgerald's editor. Ned called me a peripatetic road duck because I was always walking around with the Upanishads and things, reading this stuff. And so, I wasn't sure if there was an objectivity to this. I mean, I was open to the possibility that, my mind had just kind of made this stuff up because people have to find purpose in life, and this was as good as any. So I wasn't sure, but it seemed to me from that experience that this was more real than not. But then the incredible thing that happened was I got up to that afternoon. I made it up to Portland. Now, I'd never been to the Reed College campus before. This is in the book, there was a very thin plastic blow-up tent about the size of a 7-Eleven, and there was a wind blower that was keeping it inflated. There were colors projected on the walls. I walked up to the first person I met at Reed, and he had curly red hair that was he was bald on the top, and it was all kind of pushing out over his ears. He had a light jacket that was checkered wool of black and red. He had a can of beer in his left hand. He had a cigar that was very large and his other filled with we don't know what. And I said to him, being a St. Paul's graduate, I said, "Sir, is this Reed College?" And he looked at me. He was kind of burly, sizable. And he said, "Yeah, little buddy." And when he did that, he revealed an American flag permanently ensconced in his upper right front tooth. And he exhaled in my face. So I asked the next person I met, who was that? Well, that was Ken Kesey. And it turns out that the Reed folks let Kesey and his pranksters come to campus just that one day in the fall when little Johnny and Sally were first getting to college, you know. And he was Kesey was in the Willamette River Valley at the time, writing his second novel, Sometimes a Great Notion, which was about lumberjacks. So that night, this was mischievous, okay, I decided, okay, I'm going to call my mom again. So it was about 7 o'clock, and I called Collect, of course, and I gave her the phone number for the dormitory I was in. And I said, "Mom, I made it to college." And she said, "Oh, my God, that's wonderful. Thank heavens." And I said, "But Mom, the first person I met, not, you know, the second or the third, the very first person I met was Ken Kesey." And then there was like silence for 3 minutes, total silence. And I could hear some breathing. And I said, "Mom, are you okay?" And she said, are you okay? And I said, "Mom, he had no influence on me whatsoever," which he didn't. Cause I was really into sort of a pure mind Buddhism. So I didn't dabble with things. And, but it was very interesting. So, you know, so what happened, the big event comes, it's late January. Now, anybody who's lived in the Northwest, you know, it doesn't snow, but it rains a lot. And Portland has a lot of rain. And sometimes it gets icy and slick, and it's a little bit hazardous. And so I'm in the Reed College coffee shop. It's about 9 at night. It's late January. This is episode 2, and this guy comes in and he's got a leather black motorcycle jacket on. He looks a little bit lit up. His name is Andy, and he just comes right in between the tables and he says, "Who wants to go for a ride with me on my brand new Harley Davidson Shovel Hubber," which was the fastest motorcycle of the time. And I, like a complete moron, which I was because my frontal lobes hadn't developed yet and I wasn't making good executive decisions, I said, "I'll do it." So I went out and I got on this bike, and this guy, his name was Andy, he took off I tell you, in a minute, he hit 140, 150 miles an hour.
Oh my God.
And he went through every red light, every stop sign. He went out on the Pacific Coast Highway and he just headed south toward Northern California. And I honestly thought I was dead because he was slipping along on the slush, and we hit 180. And I actually teared up because I felt this was it. And after about an hour, he did this flying U-turn over the midway, and he actually dropped me off exactly where he had picked me up in front of the coffee shop. And I staggered across. There's a ravine. You have to walk across a wooden bridge, and then you're at your dormitory area. So I walked into my dorm. As I crossed, now I never answered the payphone that was on the wall in the common room, never. But somehow or another, just as I walked in, the moment I walked in, the phone was ringing. Now, it's 11 o'clock Pacific Coast time, so it's 2 o'clock in New York. I pick up the phone, I say hello, and it is my mother. And she said, "I just woke up. I was sweating. I had this premonition that you were dead." And we talked about it. I said, "Mom, I'm alive, but I think I almost was dead." We talked about this, and we kind of determined. My mom was a little bit of an Irish mystic. She was a painter, an abstract expressionist, pretty thoughtful woman, somewhat intuitive about things. And we decided in that conversation that that there is this infinite mind, because I'd always believed that anyway, and that somehow there was no other way to explain the fact that she, being 3,000 miles away, and of course, being Rocky Mountains and so forth betwixt and between, that she could know that I was in that grave danger. And so that was a very important episode, because between what happened on the bridge and what happened that night, I kind of understood that there's a depth and a connectivity and a mystery to the way we are one and brought together, and sometimes in these most cherishing ways, as though this infinite mind is also a kind of pure, unlimited love, and it just brings things together in this amazing web of kindness and love, and I felt like for the rest of my life I was never going to lose sight of that dynamic, and I never did. I mean, some years later I wound up I quit doing pediatric endocrinology at Cornell. I was running a lab for a while in immunology at Penn. I quit all that. I went to the University of Chicago Divinity School, where all blue dreamers need to end up, blue angel dreamers. And I studied with Mircea Eliade, who wrote Shamanism. I studied with Joseph Campbell, who was a visiting scholar there. All kinds of really exciting people. And I just very much engaged myself in this, because to me it was the purpose of my life, and it wasn't something that I had selected in a way. It really emanated from this dream.
Wow. So that's so Sasha, what was your interaction with Ken Kesey? Did you study with him, or?
No, I have no interaction with Ken Kesey at all.
Yeah, I didn't study.
Oh, okay.
My mom had read the electric Kool-Aid acid test, which I knew she had read that. So, so that's the Tom Wolfe's book. So I knew that's why she was so silent. But the other person who was there was Robert Bly, and he had come up from the Bay Area to be the poet in residence, and he was a Jungian. And I told him about my Blue Angel dream, and he was absolutely mesmerized by it. He thought it was meaningful. And I sat in the bottom of Swift Hall at the University of Chicago over a cup of coffee with Eliade and Campbell. And Campbell said, "That sounds like synchronicity, not luck." And Eliade asked me, "Well, is everything synchronicity?" And I said, "No, but I think some things are."
I guess I do have a comment. It's like, a student of Hal Stone's, a direct student of Jung's too. So from my perspective, your hypothesis that there's order in the universe, universal mind, has to be balanced by the opposite, which is that there's chaos as well as order.
Mm-hmm.
And
yes,
so, yeah, okay. So that's how I balance it out anyway.
Yeah, I mean, my view of all these things is that it's mind before matter, not vice versa.
Uh-huh.
So mind, and this is somewhat Hindu, but it's also consistent with the monotheistic traditions. That in the beginning was the Word, in the beginning was mind, beyond time, beyond space, eternal, infinite, and loving. And from that, the Big Bang comes about, and the universe springs into existence. And so I feel the presence of this infinite mind in all the ordering of the universe, the thermodynamic principles, the mathematical principles, like a lot of physicists do. Most physicists would actually agree with that. A lot of biologists don't, but the physics people and the mathematicians have always been open to this kind of perspective. And then I also accepted the idea that somehow within each of us is this inner light, this ability to connect with the universal mind and with the minds of all others, especially in moments of desperation. The fellow who actually first hypothesized brain waves did so because his daughter had a dream. He was in England, had a dream that his son had been killed on the battlefields in World War I, and that happened to have been true. So he thought there's something here that we don't understand. I used to love to read about Ramanujan, the man who knew infinity, the great mathematician in India, who never studied a bit of math in his life. But when he was 15, 16 years old, he would be on his knees before his goddess. He would be receiving these incredibly complex formulas. He'd write them down in the dirt with his hand, and then later on, he would come and write them in a notebook. And as I was talking with Bob Davies and John Burho, a Templeton Prize laureate, John is at Trinity College, Cambridge in the UK. And, in the middle of the Trinity College library, in a glass case, the center of the whole life of that place are the two notebooks of Ramanujan. And, he never proved these things, but they turned out to be right, and they were very much the basis of a lot of quantum physics. So if you look at, Maxwell, you look at a lot of scientific figures, even Einstein with his Gedanke experiments, where he would just go into these almost altered states of mind. And there's a lot of creativity, of communication, of intuition, of premonition. And the trouble is, because our world is so, or at least in the acting, I've been in Chicago, Ann Arbor, Michigan, 20 years at Case Med, and now I'm at Stony Brook, and these are all very sciencey institutions. But it's also there's a notion of materialism, that everything is derived from matter, and I just don't see that. I see everything as derived from mind.
If I may, for me, what stands out is the words derived, and that the word precedes the coalescence of matter, and so this implies temporality. And when it's interesting with the two slit experiments that the space before the slits actually changed, so that the future, not only can you change the past and the future by mind, and in other words, I would say that they imply each other rather than one causing the other, and they're simultaneous. Or there's no reason to why, or maybe I don't understand why you want to see them in a causal and sequential way.
Yeah, that's a fair question. And I was in Lyford Key at a conference I was a great friend of Sir John Templeton's for many, many years. And one of the Templeton Prize winners, Paul Davies, was there. And I asked him, I said, Paul, you wrote this book, The Mind of God, and you think that mind precedes matter. And then Paul looked at me, and very reflectively, he said, well, I'm not entirely sure of that, because I don't know what to do with the category of time. And so I acknowledge, some ambiguity in what I'm saying. But I guess what I would argue unequivocally is that mind is its own stuff, if you will, that it's not derived. And Plato thought that, and Plotinus thought that, and Hegel thought that, and many physicists thought that. So mind is mind, and it underlies the universe and all of reality. So I put mind. I don't necessarily mean first in a sequential sense, but I put mind as the primordial stuff of the universe.
I guess the other way, it must go the other way too, then, is that the universe is the stuff of mind, and mind is the stuff of the universe. That is, it's just our linguistic proclivity to dichotomization that's making us frame it this way, perhaps.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, those are good lines of argument. But let me do this, push this a little further. So I mean, it's another episode So I taught. There were all these episodes. So I taught in Ann Arbor and then got a job at Fordham University, Marymount, at the Terrytown campus, which is just across from the Tappan Zee Bridge for any New Yorker type people listening to this. And so we were moving from Ann Arbor, where rents were dirt cheap, to Terrytown, and that's New York, and it was phenomenal. I had to spend like $12,000 just to get my wife, myself, and our little 2-year-old daughter into a 1-bedroom apartment. And so wow. I was out of cash, and we had a little blue Nissan, so I paid all this money. I was going to get paid the next day, my first day's paycheck, and we had to spend the night in the Terrytown Hilton, which is right across from the Tappan Zee Bridge, beautiful hotel. I could put that on my credit card, but I didn't have any spending money. I was short on cash. So my wife and I, we were in front of that. There was a Howard Johnson's restaurant there that it is actually now a Honda dealership. But at the time it was a Howard Johnson's restaurant. And we were sitting there in the car, and I just didn't have any money to actually take us in for lunch. And so my wife and I prayed. And my wife prayed that somebody would give us $100. And I'm just sitting in the car, and I don't feel a thing. But my wife, Mitsuko, she feels something touched the car. Now, I didn't give a damn about that because this was actually a secondhand. It wasn't much of an automobile. So she said, "Why don't you go out and see what happened?" I said, "Nothing happened. Go out and see." So I went out, and unbelievably, there was this really wonderful, warm, buoyant, life-filled, about 6'4", 6'5", African-American man. He was large. He had a white suit on. Maybe he'd been to a Pentecostal service. I don't know. He had a big hat on. And he said, "Oh, don't worry about a thing. I've got it all taken care of." And he opened up his wallet and he said, "Look, just take this $100 bill and let's call it a day." And I said, "Sir, you are an answer to a Blue Angel dream." Now,
well, that's amazing.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing about something like that, I mean, it gets to this question of, the objective and the subjective, is that we were in a moment of, I probably, if we'd gone over to the Terrytown Hilton, I could have put a meal on our American Express card, but we wanted to go to Howard Johnson's, and I was low on cash. And I guess but we didn't want to load up the credit cards either, so we just said this prayer, and lo and behold, that's what happened. And I went to so I had this office at the Fordham campus there. I was in religious studies. And I had a roommate on the campus in my office. We shared an office, and his name was Gabe Gomez, which he was actually from Bangladesh. He was one of these families that years ago had been converted by the Spanish missionaries. And he was a worldwide expert on world religions. And so Gabe asked me, he'd hired me, of course. He said, "Well, so what really got you into spirituality?" And I said, "Gabe, when I was 15, I had this Blue Angel dream." And I proceeded to tell him all about the dream. And I told him about the argument I had with my folks and leaving the car on Route 80 and all of the above. And how when I was at the University of Chicago and people asked me where I was from, I used to say, "Well, if you really want to know, Route 80. So he said, "What you have to do, you have to walk out of this office right now, and you have to walk around the reservoir, and it's about an hour. It's about a half an hour walk around this reservoir, and go to Peconico Hills, which is the enclave for the Rockefeller family in Westchester County, and go to the Union Church, which is this beautiful stone church. It's Presbyterian. And there you will see the Chagall window of the Good Samaritan. So I went over there, and there was this big blue window of the Good Samaritan with this incredible blue angel in it. It kind of reminded me a little bit of my dream, but I wasn't sure. I had all the symbols of the world's religions, and I just really got excited by this. That's the only church in the world where you can sit and actually all the Hebrew prophets are there in the sideways. You can sit in a pew and touch a Chagall stained glass window with your elbow, and no one yells at you. So,
wow.
So it's really precious. And there's a Matisse. This is Nelson Rockefeller was into modern art a lot, and Chagall was a very deep spiritual thinker who was just really uncanny. And so I started to study Chagall a little bit, and even began to teach a course on it, because it turns out, see, he became my brother in the journey. So he was born in a small town in Russia, probably about 1880, and his dad was a Hasidic Jew who pickled herring, and he wanted Marc Chagall to work in the pickle factory. Okay. And I thought, pickling herring, cutting lampshades. Okay, close. And so when Chagall was 17, he had a pretty explosive argument with his parents. By the way, I don't trust anybody who doesn't tell me that they at some point didn't have an explosive argument with their dads. So he ran away and he went to St. Petersburg, and he lived on the streets. He'd never painted before, but he sketched, and he sold his sketches. And then one night, he describes it in a book called My Life, which he wrote about 10 years later when he was in Moscow. And he said, I was sleeping in the alley on a mattress next to a large construction worker. And I wasn't sure if I was awake or asleep, but I had this incredible vision, and the whole alleyway filled with blue light. And I saw the fluttering wings of an angel. And then the angel arose up through the top of the alley and left just blue color behind it. And the next day, Chagall painted his first painting of a blue angel. It's called The Apparition. And the rest of his life, all his windows at the UN, even when he died outside of Paris, the day he died, he was painting a blue angel. And so here I had found someone who had run away from home because he didn't want to work in the factory, and he was a blue angel.
Uh-huh.
And I began to feel normal. I mean, shockingly,
That's wonderful. I'm trying to find the picture of that painting while we're.
Yeah, The Apparition, Marc Chagall, but all of his stuff. I mean, sometimes he didn't paint blue angels. Sometimes he painted red angels or white angels, especially when he was experiencing persecution in Germany under the Nazis and so forth. But for the most part, he said that blue was the color of love, and this was Chagall, and so I kind of felt, Picasso said that, Chagall's painting is so unique and so great, he must have angels dancing around his brain. Okay.
Ah.
Yeah. So for me, he used all the symbols of the world. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
So you saw a blue angel as well. You were.
Well, yeah. When I was at St. Paul's, and this did not, it recurred 5 or 6 times when I was a young kid, and I never had that experience again. But I didn't need to, because it was enough to just intuitively, sort of incline me to take this Western journey. Now, as I said, the subject, object, how sure was I? Not terribly sure, but I was intuitive enough to think that maybe there's something to it. And it was that argument that I had with my dad about the lampshade factory that really pushed me over there. But there were so many events of synchronicity, and I felt like in Chagall, I found a brother.
Fascinating. I'm trying to find the Blue Angel. I'll find it. I'm looking at his paintings.
Yeah,
so,
in the book, in that chapter, it's the only chapter where I quote anything. I actually quote his incredible statement from my life, which again, he didn't write in St. Petersburg. He wrote it in Moscow about 10 years later. But it's an amazing passage. It's one of the most mystical and deep passages. He felt like he was invaded by this blue angel, and then it left, and he felt that somehow blue was the soothing color of love that he would paint with the rest of his life.
So this fight with your father was defining for you. Was that your father or your father and mother?
Well, it's my father. So my mother.
Male?
Yeah. So my mom didn't want me to do this. She was, I guess part of mother love is the extension of anxiety. Okay. And, she didn't want me doing this in the Bronx. And my dad was more or less sort of following her around, but he'd been a commander in the war, and he was kind of a tough guy in his own way. And so at a certain point, I just decided, well, I guess I'll be flexible, but very reluctantly and grudgingly. And then it was that 2 weeks in Bill's factory that just put me over the top.
Over the top. And that's a good point to break. We'll be back in 5 minutes. And so stay tuned. See you after the commercial break.
Radio at freedomslips.com. We'll be right back after this message.
Wadiya will remain a dictatorship. Or be quiet. Why are you guys so anti-dictators? Imagine if America was a dictatorship. You could let 1% of the people have all the nation's wealth. You could help your rich friends get richer by cutting their taxes and bailing them out when they gamble and lose. You could ignore the needs of the poor for healthcare and education. Your media would appear free, but would secretly be controlled by one person and his family. You could wiretap phones. You could torture foreign prisoners. You could have rigged elections. You could lie about why you go to war. You could fill your prisons with one particular racial group, and no one would complain. You could use the media to scare the people into supporting policies that are against their interests.
Tune in Monday through Friday, 4 p.m. Eastern Time for Liberation Nation with Deacon John, where America comes to hear the truth.
I know this is hard for you Americans to imagine, but please try.
Ohio Exopolitics will be on from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern on Studio A. Mark Schneider will have guests on that will discuss many important topics, including the state of the world today. However, much of the show will be dedicated to the writings of Edward Albert Meyer. Let me read a short passage from one of his writings. Love is the highest principle of creation, and through it, everything exists in absolute logic. All of nature in its indescribable splendor is nothing but the love of creation, which is expressed visibly. The love of creation is everywhere, because without it, nothing at all would be able to exist. Please join Mark on Ohio Exopolitics from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern on Studio A.
It is no secret that the so-called mainstream media is best described as controlled propaganda. Countless news stories are either totally ignored or spun with half-truths, and because of this, essential facts and vital information are often compromised. Join Dr. Ott every Friday night on Studio B at 10 p.m. Eastern and learn why The Story Behind the Story was nominated for a Peabody Award in its second year of producing unparalleled broadcasting excellence in 1997. That is, if you really care about learning the truth.
Transcending time and space, let us take you to the place inside your mind where thoughts divide and mysteries unwind. Join us every Monday evening right here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And you will catch the Fenton Perspective with our great host, Lorian Fenton. Come listen in as she shares her amazing stories from the past to present, along with all of her guest secrets to the future. That's the Fenton Perspective every Monday evening right here from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, only on Revolution Radio. Oh, and you don't need to expect us. We're already here.
Extendivite really works. Just listen to what some people have to say.
Several years ago, I was developing a very severe situation. I called it my flippy heart. It was doing not good things, and I did not want to go to a medical doctor because I just knew they would give me a cover-up pill. I didn't want to get onto that sort of thing at all. When I learned it was garlic and cayenne, and cayenne is a healer. It is a wonderful herb. I said, I think I'm onto something here. I'll tell you, I wouldn't be without it. It did wonderful things for me.
Extendivite is only $69.95 for a 2-month supply of either capsules or liquid. Call now. That's 1-877-928-8822 or visit heartdrop.com.
Extend your life with Extendivite.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Aloha and welcome back to Stargate to the Cosmos, and I'm Janet Care Lessin with my co-host Dr. Sasha, Alex Lessin, producer Thomas Becker, and our guest is Stephen G. Post, Ph.D. But before we get back to our show, I'd like to remind everybody to please go over to that donation button on revolution.radio and make your donation, because we really need your donations. And Hawk is getting better. He'll be coming home soon, and hopefully we'll get back to normal, and we'll be able to tell you where we are in our standings every week. We have no idea what we need and how much we've earned, but we'll get those figures in a few days. Hopefully we're ahead of the game and not running behind in our funding for this month. Dr. Sasha, are you there? Are you back from the break?
Yes, indeed, I am. And it'd be fun to kick off this thing before we resume this sequence, just to sort of see if you were the synchronizer or the synchronizing principle or the creator of all or whatever you want to call it. What is your existence? What do you like? What do you like, creator of all? Oversoul?
Yeah, that's right. Well, I had a wonderful career. I've taught in great medical schools. I've met wonderful people. I was befriended by Sir John Templeton, and we did so many great things in science and spirituality. health and spirituality and so forth. But, where this Blue Angel theme picks up again, so I'd gotten recruited to Stony Brook to start a program in the medical school, and that was in 2008. So very reluctantly, we left Cleveland. I'd been at Case Med for 20 years. We raised our kids in the suburb of Shaker Heights. But I had an opportunity here. They wanted me to really help create community around compassionate care, and it was a deep challenge. So we showed up here, and I had a call, to go back to this was about 2014, to go back to Peconico Hills, which is just behind Terrytown, where I'd been teaching years earlier at Fordham, and give a lecture on Chagall at that Union Church. And so, I said, absolutely. So I drove over the Throgs Neck Bridge and gave this evening lecture. It was nicely attended. It was raining like crazy. And then I came back, and this is November 2014. It's a fall night. It's probably, 11 or 12 at night. I get into our place in Stony Brook, and I have an email from an advisor to my Institute for Research on Unlimited Love, which, by the way, was named and funded by Sir John, and I'm the president of it. And it's funded all kinds of projects from IONS to Harvard on these matters of love as ultimate reality. So I'm looking at my email, and there's a message from a wonderful Pakistani psychologist named Dure Ahmad, who was from Lahore. And it said, go to your website. It's been for the Institute, it's been completely demolished, and there's a ISIS flag. And it turns out it was about the third website to be taken down by Team DZ ISIS, which was the ISIS hacking arm. And my newsletter, which had gotten around the Middle East quite a bit and was arguing against hating other people just because they disagreed with your beliefs. That was probably the reason behind this. But at any rate, I didn't quite know what to do. So we decided, my board and I, most of them are from Cleveland, that we would have an international essay contest and invite young people from all over the world to write reflective essays on how they pushed back against peer pressure to hate other people just because they didn't share their beliefs. We got thousands of these essays. We did have a cash award. We have several layers of cash award. And at the time, I was actually co-chairing the UN Population Foundation project on spirituality and sustainable development and such things. So, they got wind of what had happened with ISIS, and they knew there was this essay contest going on because it got quite a lot of attention in the media. And so in August of 2016, on World Youth Day at the UN, the Institute filled up the entire UN headquarters with young people from all over the globe, all over the country. And these people, they performed their winning essays. Some of them were rap style. Some of them were bluegrass. I mean, it was incredible. Some of them were just, straight out reading poetry. It was a phenomenal thing, and it was broadcast around the world to 80 million young people. So the message for me there was that, even though, you can come home, and of course we had to rebuild the website, and in the chapter there, actually the email from Dure, I don't name her because I'm worried about her getting in some trouble over there, but also from Ned Barrett, who was my webmaster in Philadelphia. It's all there, and this is, I had to talk to the FBI. I mean, it's all there. I felt like, life is an expanding canvas. And so even if something not so great happens, you get hacked by ISIS Team DZ and you've got to rebuild your website, and you've got to build in a lot of extra protections, and you're not quite sure about these things. But it's like a Jackson Pollock painting. Pollock oftentimes he just had a gob of paint that he threw down in the middle of a canvas on the floor of that barn out in East Hampton. And it looked like heck, it wasn't anything aesthetic and beautiful. But by the time he covered it up with all these millions of beautiful, vibrant, energetic lines and all these beautiful colors, it always looked beautiful. And so that was it's been my approach to life, actually, is I was going to take that moment and I was going to expand it outwards and do something really beautiful with it. And so if you look at the website, it's www.unlimitedloveinstitute.org. You look where you'll see all these people gathered at the UN, and you can actually see videos of these young people from all over the world performing their prize-winning essays. It's really exciting. We just finished a whole nother essay contest called Love All Means All, and that's so. I really like the idea of helping young people to live according to the golden rule. I love Rockwell's image of the golden rule, and people just in these difficult times galvanizing around using their moral imaginations and asking themselves, how can I contribute to the lives of others? So that's the story of getting to the UN, and again, it's all full of synchronicity in these wonderfully elegant ways.
So you have another book called Why Good Things Happen to Good People: How to Live a Longer, Happier, Healthier Life by the Simple Act of Giving.
Yes.
So could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, that I had a with author, Jill Nymark, who writes for, Scientific American and Discover magazine. She's a good writer, popular science writer. But, in the Blue Angel Dream, the message was, if you save him, you too shall live. And, yes. And it meant something like, even if you don't, you don't count for reciprocal gains, don't count for payback. If you just, if you help others, if you contribute to their lives, in whatever sense you save them, you inevitably, feel gratified. You get into a very good space spiritually. You turn off all these destructive emotional circuits like bitterness and hostility that give you protracted stress and are not very good for your health in a whole variety of ways. So if you save him, you too shall live. Why good things happen to good people? Obviously, bad things happen to everybody. No one gets out of life alive. And, bad things happen to everybody. But on a whole, my research for 15 years has shown, even 25 years, that people who are not focused on the self and the problems of the self, but are contributing to those around them, that they tend to thrive, they tend to be happier, they tend to be more resilient, they tend to handle loss and disappointment much better. They report that they're physically healthier, they sleep better, they have deeper friendships, and so forth, etc. So this book, which Random House published, became a mild bestseller for a couple of years, and people still read it. It's kind of a backorder classic, I guess. But absolutely. So it's all about the ways in which we benefit from helping others, even though we may not get any, quote unquote payback. I had so some friends of mine here at the center wrote an article on widows and widowers. Again, emphasis, happy marriages. Okay. And now they're going through grief and bereavement, and they get through that process quicker. and in a more lasting way, if they self-report informal helping of others in their neighborhood, in their communities, in their congregations, or volunteering more formally. And so the findings were very robust. And I got a call from the New York Society of Widows and Widowers. Can you believe it? There is such a thing. Mm-hmm. It's a big support network. And they were having a conference at the Marriott Hotel in the middle of Manhattan. And they wanted me to come in and do a plenary address. So I said, okay. Took the train and gave this talk. I thought it went all right. And I had about 15 minutes for Q&A. And there was this guy in the back of this ballroom, and he was frantically waving his hands. And I called on him. You know, I had to call on him. I had to, because he was so energetic and he wasn't going to let me get by him. So I said, "Yes, sir." And he looked at me and he said, "I don't care what you say, buddy. I don't do nothing for nothing." And so even though, I've been talking about all these internal benefits he would have just by sort of, putting his own struggles on the shelf and focusing more on the lives of others and being concerned about their security and their happiness. He just didn't get that. So people are limited by their ideas. They have these ideas that everything has to be calculated, tit for tat. I don't want to be a sucker, but the bottom line is that if you just, live a more generous life and don't worry about these things, you'll, generally be happier and healthier, and you really will. Various studies show tend to live a longer life.
Stephen, I from my perspective, I hear this man crying for help. Like, where in the world did you pick that attitude up, and what brought it up for you? It's like it sounds like a cry for help to me.
It is a cry for help, but also, I spent those 20 years in Cleveland in Shaker Heights, and it was a really nice community. People took the time to connect with each other over the course of the day. Life was a little bit slower. Sasha, they greeted one another. There was a lot more smiling and sort of informal support and kindness and philanthropy and community identity. And, here in greater New York, it's not that people are unkind. That's not true. But they don't trust their neighbors. They have friendship networks. They're pretty good if you get on a bus studies show and you need a quarter. You're just as likely to get a quarter from somebody in New York as you are from somebody in Cleveland. But, even our students, when they get these spring breaks, they might go down to Atlanta or New Orleans or someplace to do some social work and to help with reconstruction or habitat or whatever it might be. And they come back and I ask them what they experienced. Most of them, they're from the Bronx, they're from Brooklyn, they're from Queens. They'll say, the amazing thing is that people took the time to talk to each other. There was a warmth. There was a real community. They weren't too busy to connect. And these folks had never seen that. In other words, they'd never experienced the value of being in community and of these higher, I would call them spiritual values. It was all, I don't do nothing for nothing. And
right.
And it's, the Long Island, by the way, in the book, I talk a little bit about the Long Island Expressway. So my mother, after World War II, I think it's 1948, my mother and father were both working in New York, and it was a Friday evening. They were driving out, to Long Island on the Long Island Expressway, and my father rear-ended my mother's car. They never met.
Okay.
They never met. And his car wouldn't run. And she looked at him, and I think, there weren't that many good looking guys around because they'd all gotten killed at Pearl Harbor. He'd been in the Navy,
Mm-hmm.
And so she took him home to the 100-acre potato farm in Bridgehampton, and the family got started. But so it wasn't.
Wow, that's how they met.
So even though I'm no fan of the Long Island Expressway with all the trucks and the gestures and so forth, I got to tell you that in itself. I know. So this is a question that you can play with, Sasha and Janet. I mean, was that an act of synchronicity? Was it a spiritual birth story, or was it just a stupid accident? And my mother,
there are no accidents.
Yeah. So my mom, who was, she was Irish Catholic, Molly McGee. She felt that somehow this was all in the hands of God, and it was an act of God. Now, that's, so I, anyway, that's in the book because it's not a major episode, but it's the kind of thing that makes you wonder.
Well, you wouldn't have existed, and all the good things that you've done. It's kind of like It's a Wonderful Life. Without that, pretty coincident.
Yeah, and when I
wouldn't have happened.
I went up to St. Paul's and it was filled with people who were really sort of high class. By the way, Robert Mueller, John Kerry went there, Charlie Scribner. It was just an amazing bunch of people. And a lot of them, they were pretty upper crust. I was just pretty much a standard Long Island kid. And so I was, by the way, originally from Babylon, Long Island. So I got into a Sacred Studies class and they were talking about Babylon, Mesopotamia, and I just didn't get it. So I said, well, I'm from Babylon, and we have hanging gardens at Argyle Park, and that's where I snag herring. And everybody cracked up laughing. And they were talking about King Nebuchadnezzar. I said, well, I never met him. So, I was on a pretty steep learning curve. But all these people, they'd had virtually arranged marriages. I mean, they were all from these families of note and distinction, and so when I had to give my sixth form talk in the chapel, I said, a lot of things that happen in life, we don't have any control over ourselves. They're not part of our power, but they come into our lives and they shape everything, and they're in the control of this infinite mind. And I went on to tell them the story about how Dad crashed into the rear end of Mom's car, and everybody just howled with laughter. But I've never been one. See, the God and Love on Route 80 is a journey book, and it's I don't believe that we make our lives, that we just sort of we shouldn't be so arrogant as to think I make my life. I make it happen. I'm the agent. I'm the person who's doing everything and making everything happen. I mean, if you're honest about it, most of what we do is we respond. We're on a journey and we run into the right person at the right time. It could be Gary in his white truck. We encounter people and we respond to them, hopefully, with love and kindness and creativity as is possible. But we don't really make our lives so much as we make our responses. And life is a journey because we don't know who we're going to encounter sort of over the hill on Route 80. We just don't know. But it's that's not in our hands. And the point is that if we're open to it, if we notice. I love Larry Dossey's book One Mind, and he says, he wrote the foreword to God and Love on Route 8. It's a beautiful foreword. The guy's incredible. I mean, I emailed him. I said, would you write a blurb for this book? And he looked at it, he wrote a blurb, and then he wrote back like the next day. He said, wait a minute, I want to write a foreword for this. So he wrote this beautiful foreword. And, I think he's a brilliant man, and he's such a kind and generous guy to do that. So, but for me, I'm always, every day I'm open to surprises, and I want to be responsive to the things that just kind of come into my path. And unlike, I went to a high school reunion, in June, And, a lot of the guys have been very successful and done different things. They've gone to Wall Street, they've gone into law firms and so forth. But, I wouldn't trade my life for any of their lives, because I went out on Route 80.
Right. How did you end up in that school? You described it like an orphanage or something. So I thought at first you were an orphan, but then you brought in your parents.
Yeah, no. I mean, I say that kind of, just to be tongue in cheek a little bit. But I mean, St. Paul's, it's like, Exeter and Andover. It's one of the top prep schools academically in New England. And, my dad had gone to a private school in upstate New York, and it was just kind of on my mind. And also my brother had gone to St. Paul's, and so it was kind of in the family. And so I went up there, and I was way out of my league. I mean, these people a lot of them from New York City and Boston. They were very highly learned and educated people. And I wasn't quite like that. I mean, it's my dorm in the one of the blurbs for God Loving Route 80 is from Julie Norman, who's still alive. She lives in Martha's Vineyard in Vineyard Haven. And she emailed me, and she said, I was Stephen's dorm mother at St. Paul's, and what I remember was his lack of sophistication and the simplicity of heart and his Blue Angel dream, and I always hoped that he would never lose that. And and I actually, so she's still alive, and she's closing in on 90, I guess, but she's great. And I visit her about every 2 years. I take the fast ferry from Manhattan all the way through Long Island Sound to Martha's Vineyard and spend a couple of days.
So if good things happen to good people, go ahead, Sasha, your turn. Go ahead.
Oh, you raised in my mind the question of intentionality. Following Kirstenbaum, the way I regard my intentions are manifest in my results, whether my intentions are conscious or not. So it's my job when something occurs to see what's in it for me. What can I learn from it? If I had created it for myself, what would I get out of it? So that's perhaps an alternative approach to intentionality.
Yeah, it is, and so it's intentionality of a sort. It's not like you're laying down a lot of plans and goals and operationalizing them. I was never like that. I used to frustrate my teachers a bit because I was a good student, but I wasn't quite like the other folks around me. And so you have intentionality, but your intentionality is more along the lines of what you're going to learn and pick up from the people who just somehow in synchronicity come into your path.
Yes.
So you can, so I say in the book that, I was much more interested in destiny than goals, my own little goals. I mean, my own goals to this day, I mean, they seem so trivial, in so many different ways, but I feel like we each have a destiny, and if we just walk that path, our intentionality should be that when things that are coming to us to show us the larger picture of our lives and the callings that we have, the vocations that we have, that's when we really want to use our intentionality and make the most of them.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I wanted to comment on this idea of unilateral giving as a way of making you feel good, the giver, and if it's anonymous, it feels real good too. And that's a way of actually bringing peace. And we talk about, I think it was some experiments of, we withdrew from the line in Germany facing the tanks with our tanks barrel to barrel, and suddenly we gave them 10 miles and backed off. The Soviets didn't know what to do, and pretty soon they got the orders and they backed off some too. And so that's the great way to start any kind of interaction by just giving. It feels good and it brings peace.
Yeah, so absolutely, and so, you know, when I was up in New Hampshire, I had a lot of blessings as a young kid up there. Norman Rockwell, who, you know, did the iconic picture of the Golden Rule with people from every age and religious background, secular background, every color, gender, they're all there, and they're focusing their minds on the Golden Rule in its positive formulation: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So it's not the negative view, which just says do not do. So that means you know, the negative view is just, okay, I'm not going to elbow some innocent person in the hallway today, and that allows me to get home and put my feet up and feel good about my life, right? I mean, the positive version asks us to use our moral imaginations and think, how can I contribute to the lives around me? So, you know, Rockwell asked us, so what about the facial expressions of all these people in his painting? It was on the cover of Look magazine, by the way, in I think 1964. And this was painted before the civil rights era, so he was really injecting this very radical vision into American culture. And we all said, you know, they look serene, they look tranquil. And it's true, they look pensive, they look tranquil. And, you know, now scientifically we know that when you're in that sort of compassionate state of mind, you're the neurological circuits that are associated with destructive emotions are just turned off. You can't have compassion running at the same time as hostility and bitterness. It doesn't work. So that's really interesting. And also, he said, you know, there are no edges to the picture, because he wanted to give the sense that this is about a shared humanity. It's not just about loving the nearest and the dearest or the people who are in our in-groups, but it's really about a shared humanity. And then he said, this was surprising. They didn't have, at the time, you know, laser beam pointers. They just had, you know, wooden dowels. He said, does anybody see a halo? And lo and behold, you know, he made a circle in the middle of the painting from the rabbi's white beard. Anybody can go online, just go Rockwell, the Golden Rule, and then down to the right, the shirt of the toddler, and then you go to the left, and there's a, you know, woman in a white shawl. And he said, that's spirituality for me. He said, I'm not very religious, but he said, I got to tell you that when I get into the mindset of loving others, I feel so free and I feel so beyond time and place. I get so into the flow that's really what spirituality is for me. And then I actually asked him a question. I said, well, you know, I'm from Long Island and I surf sometimes at Gilgo Beach. And I said, it's kind of like you got to paddle really, really, really. You got a lot of surfing in Hawaii, you know, you got to paddle really hard for a minute to sort of catch the wave. And, you know, that's, you know, you're helping others. You're doing, you know, you're doing your best. But then at a certain point, you're just riding the wave and it's almost effortless. You do have to balance, you know. But that's spirituality, is when that sort of giving becomes just so much a part of your energy, that's what you are.
I'm looking at this. Do you want
just
Golden Rule? That is, it is such a beautiful. I recommend everybody go look it up. I'm going to try to capture an image of it and put it on the website here, but I'm looking for the best one.
It's in the United Nations. Yeah, Nancy Reagan put a mosaic version of it, I think in 1985, in the United Nations. So you've got Rockwell's Golden Rule, you've got Chagall's UN windows, and I mean, it's some of the spiritual artwork in the early UN is just unbelievably interesting.
Yeah, it's just so you said everybody looks kind of serene, So that's Rockwell with his hand on his chin, right?
Yeah, that is. You see the guy with the denim jacket. I don't have it with me, but there's on the upper, sort of the mid but upper right, there's a guy who's scratching his chin, right? And that's Rockwell. And he was kind of a secular existentialist type guy. He was Episcopalian in name only. And basically Sartre, who was the great existentialist philosopher, Being and Nothingness, he in this great section of that book called The Look, he says, look, watch out for anybody who even looks at you with kindness, who even smiles at you as if to be nice, because they're just after your pocketbook. They're just after your wallet. So hold on tight. So you had this incredible suspicion of human motivation. And so, but even Rockwell up there, scratching his chin, still, he's thinking about the golden rule. And, Sartre believed that we really do have to make meaning. Sartre would say that my whole Blue Angel dream was something that I conjured up in a desperate detour, because we need to find meaning, and our world sometimes just feels so empty. It's like we're getting sucked down into a negative vortex, and we don't have community, and we can't find any higher purpose, and we go into despair, and we have deaths of despair, and go to Hamilton County, Ohio, and look at all the opioid deaths of the young guys. So, there is a tendency, Sartre would say, in which we have to have dreams. We have to make up meaning, because if we don't, who else will? Now, I'm more objective than that, because I really believe that these episodes I had, based on this Blue Angel dream, that they were special and that they were reasonably objective. And I think that synchronicity is not just explained by probability theories. I think there's something to it, but not everybody does.
So things happen to good people, and how to live a longer, happier, healthier life by the simple act of giving. Are selfish people, do they tend to live not as long? Has there been
absolutely, yeah. So you can go back to a study that we talk about in the book that began at Berkeley, California, for you Bay Area folks, in the very end of the 1920s, and they took 300 random sample 12-year-olds from across the Bay Area, and they asked them, so what motivates you? What floats your boat? And about a third of these kids said, I want to use my talents to help humanity, to make a difference. About 2/3 of them didn't. And then they followed these kids over the course of their lifetimes. They would interview them every 10 years for psychological surveys. They would look at their medical records. And it turns out that the 100 who had that more generous attitude were very much spared midlife illnesses, whether it would be diabetes or asthma or heart disease or depression and the like. And now there's only about, I'm going to say 40 of this group that are still alive, because, they're now like, they're hitting 100 basically. And, but 2/3 of the ones who were still alive, okay, so get that. 2/3 of the ones who are still alive come from the 1/3 who, as 12-year-olds, said, I want to use my talents to help others. So whatever your model is, if you can get young people acculturated to kindness, we got to raise more kind children. I mean, you want they've got all these problems with violence and incredible stuff going on in our society today. We have to learn how to raise kind children and children's sense of a shared humanity. That's really the deep issue. And there's a really amazing Harvard study from their School of Education, came out 2 years ago, said, parents, they want to raise kind children until the kids hit about 13 or 14. And then it's all about, pressure to succeed, get into the right colleges, pay off the coaches at USC and Yale so that, I mean, things like that, right? I mean, give me a break. And so, I mean, what happens is that, success and competition and prestige and power trump kindness, in the minds of parents and as reported by children, about the age of 13 or 14. And what we need to do is we have to decide that the only reason to bring children into the world is to raise them into kindness. And if we do that, first of all, they will be described by their peers as kind. They will be capable of more lasting and meaningful relationships, and they will live happier, healthier, and longer lives. And how much longer? Well, there's 8 studies of older adults. They vary a little bit. Some are from like age 70 to 90. Some are from 65 to 85 or 90. It varies a little bit. But basically, after you factor out all the confounders, the older adults who are helping others, they're not just sort of getting meals on wheels, but they're actually involving themselves, even if it's in an assisted living center and they're putting together baskets or knitting mittens for the kids in the cancer center at the hospital. They actually do better. And when they're involved in those kinds of activities, they have lower depression rates, much lower depression rates, which is a big deal in the older population. And they also live on average a couple of years longer.
Fascinating.
It's not
Sasha, you had something.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, just, from my perspective, it's important to balance the giver in you with the receiver too, so that you don't dissipate all your energies, but you can receive enough so that you can be partially selfish and partially generous. But I think it's a mistake to try to throw yourself entirely into either one or the other, but you can embrace both. That's all I would add. I'm 100% with that. And in fact, our big problem in medical schools is with burnout. I mean, the doctors they're not taking care of themselves, and they have pretty high suicide rates per capita compared to the general population. They're very altruistic, but they also don't look after themselves. They don't even make. A lot of them don't have annual checkups. If they have a pain in their sides, they tend not to get it checked out. If they have depression, they're too embarrassed to talk about it with their peers because it's a sign of weakness. So I agree completely. I think that the first things first, you have to love yourself. Yeah.
And if you can love yourself, then you can love others. But if you don't love yourself, you really can't love others. And my definition of love, which I've been using for a long time, is kind of it's a variation on the theme of a University of Chicago psychiatrist named Harry Stack Sullivan.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, great guy, had a relational theory of schizophrenia. I mean, he amazing guy. But he said, when the happiness and the security of another is as real and meaningful to you as your own, you love that person. Let me sort of restate that. When the happiness and security of another is as real and meaningful to you as your own, you love that person. Now, you're still in the picture as your own, right? And so it's not like self-immolation. I mean, there might be cases where, your calling in life, like Martin Luther King was a mirthful guy, and he loved himself, and he loved others, and he happened to be called into a kind of activism that had risk. Risk came with the territory. And so he was never seeking a bullet. That would have been masochism. But he was also courageous, as was Gandhi, and bullets found them both. But the point is that if they were seeking that, it would not have been healthy or good or genuine. So you've got to be thinking about the self, and this idea of ignoring the needs of the legitimate needs of the self and balance in life and care of the self. That is just in the end not going to work. Would you agree?
Yeah, I totally. Yes, yeah. You're right on. Yeah, you've got to ultimately be your own a loving parent.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm all for that. I'm all for that. Yeah. So it's, so that's why, love thy neighbor as thyself. That shows up in a lot of literature, but one of the first places is in Leviticus. And what it says is, actually it says, do not seek vengeance or bear a grudge, but love your neighbor as yourself. And the point there, is that no matter how upset you are with what somebody's done, and people do bad things to people, you're going to be better off if you just turn from that and do your best to contribute to the lives around you, because otherwise you're just going to get caught up in this negative downward vortex of bitterness, hostility, and rumination. And what's going to happen is, over the years, and this is proven fact, you're going to be throwing out all this cortisol. Your adrenal glands are going to be maybe twice the size of a normal adrenal gland sitting on top of the kidney. You're going to be transforming metabolites into fatty acids, which will clog up your veins, and you'll have vascular disease. You're going to have slower wound healing by about 20%, and you're going to have hippocampal atrophy. So, 20 years ago, neurologists didn't believe that protracted stress over the years contributed to the onset of Alzheimer's disease. Now they all do. They all do. And it's one factor. There are many other factors, including age and some susceptibility genes. But the bottom line is that, when you're under protracted stress, you get hippocampal atrophy, which is that part of the brain that kind of lays down memories. And so, when you love others, and when you get your mind off your resentments and the self and the problems of the self, and just, breathe out and say, I'm the right person. I'm thinking of, Tikkun alone. I'm the right person in the right place at the right time to help the person who's right next to me. You're going to be, you're going to have benefits in general. These are generalizations. Mm-hmm. There are exceptions, and it's not foolproof. But, and I'm not saying that you do this kind of activity because you know that you can be sure of benefits. In fact, when I wrote Why Good Things Happen to Good People, there was a reviewer from the LA Times who basically said, she was a pretty good review, but she said, it makes helping others sound like you're going to the gym to work out. So I've always add, these are probabilities, and your motivation should be pure. You're doing this because, you've discovered that you're not the center of the universe, that people don't revolve around you, that you don't just relate to others because they contribute to your narrow little selfish agendas, but you discover others as ends in themselves, as centers of value. And no, they don't rotate around you. And when you do that, Martin Buber called that the move from I-it to I-thou. When you discover the I-thou, then there's still an I, but it's a healthier, happier, bigger I. And if you're a Hindu, even I-thou isn't enough, because it's also I or I me, because we all are one. We're all part of the same consciousness. Mm-hmm. And therefore, when we help others, we're helping ourselves.
I was wondering, it's 50 years later. Do you remember what day, what month you started that journey? This is your anniversary.
Oh, you mean in the car? Oh, okay. Yeah, absolutely. I took the car in late July of 1969, and it was a Friday night, and I had a gal friend who was blonde and had blue eyes, and there was some eternity in her smile. So that was not a push. That was a pull east. Uh-huh. And I had some good friends out there. Livy Sutro was a good buddy of mine. He went to Yale. He studied anthropology. He eventually became he worked in Arizona with the border security for most of his life at a pretty high level, and he did a lot of work with Native Americans. But these were good people. But I remember distinctly, that somehow or another, I was not going to tolerate another day in Bill DeBono's lampshade factory. And I also was really curious about the dream. I mean, I knew I had this feeling. It was very intuitive that there was something for me to discover, but I had no idea what it was in the West. And that was it.
Did the girlfriend feel abandoned? Did you ever clear that with her?
You know, that's really funny. She heard that I'd gone to read, and I got a letter from her that fall when I was up in Oregon, and it was a really beautiful letter. And I can't really explain this, but I didn't respond to it. Maybe I just thought I was too far away, or that it wasn't something I was going to pursue at the time. But I did. So when I wrote Why Good Things Happen to Good People, she actually lives in Sarasota, Florida. So I gave her a call and I said, I want to send you this book. And so I sent her a copy of the book, and we actually got together just for dinner in Sarasota. I've been happily married for 37 years and faithfully so. But I reconnected with her, just because I thought it was a good thing to do. Maybe I was thinking karma,
Mm-hmm. So was there a reason coming up to the anniversary that you decided to do your book this year or at this time?
No, because
was that part of your inspiration?
Right. So in 2000, so Sir John Templeton and I were very close friends. He was the investor, and he left all his money to study things like gratitude and forgiveness and kindness and unlimited love. So I co-chaired a conference at MIT on altruism, empathy, and agape love in October of 1999 with about 15 great scientists and 15 great practitioners of generosity. And we spent 3 days together, and the idea was to challenge science to study this most noble quality of human behavior and not just disease states or depression or whatever, or learn helplessness in dogs. So it was a great event, and we did an edited book with Oxford. It was just purely academic stuff. And anyway, so Sir John faxed me. He lived in Lyford Key, which is in Nassau in the Bahamas. He loved the fax. He didn't email. He was too old for it. He was like 90, but he thought the fax was the most incredible thing ever created. It was so ingenious. And he would fax you sometimes a dozen things in a day. And I got a fax from him. I was sitting in my office in the medical school at Case Western. I get a fax. Dear Stephen, we need to start an institute to study love. Not just human love, but the love that made humans. Get that, Sasha, okay? So yeah, I said it would be arrogant just to study human love. And human love is so uneven anyway. I mean, it's myopic. It comes and goes. It's narrow, it's unsteady, but we need something deeper than that. And so I faxed back, Sir John, what should we call this? And he said, the Institute for Research on Unlimited Love. And then I had a moment, I'm going to just confess this, Janet, I had a moment of trepidation because I'm, hanging around all these big scientists, and, I'm already controversial enough. So I faxed back, maybe we should call it the Institute for Creative Altruism, because that's more of a sciencey word, but it doesn't have the spiritual feel. So Sir John faxed back, no, I think unlimited love up to $8.9 million. And I did what I think you all would have done, including Tom. I faxed back, Sir John, I love that language. It jumps right off the page. And, the checks came, we funded all this great research and many of the leaders in the whole positive psychology movement, really came out of this kind of thing. And I was happy Marty Seligman in his book Flourishing referred to me as one of the rock stars of positive psychology. But the funny thing is that, even meeting Sir John was so much. There was so much synchronicity in it. And when Sir John died, he died in 2008. he was on his deathbed in Nassau, and his son, Jack, who was a pediatric trauma surgeon at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, he calls me. And he says, Dad is dying, and Dad wants to write a book, and he doesn't have time to write it, but he wants you to do it for him because he thinks you'll be faithful to his ideas. So I said, well, what's he want to call it? And Jack said, Unlimited Love is Ultimate Reality. And I said, Jack, I'll do it because I love Sir John, but we got to make it into a question. So Jack got back to me. Yeah, Dad says it's okay. Is ultimate reality unlimited love? Question mark. But I started writing Route 80.
That's a good sale.
Yeah, Route 80 vignettes in 2000 as e-letters, and then only about 5 years ago I decided, the Route 80 story and the dream is so powerful. I actually want to write a book about it, and that's what God and Love on Route 80 is.
I love it. I'm so glad you did. We have one more minute. Tell us your websites and how to get a hold of you.
Well, my own website is, Steve, Stephen, it's the Irish spelling, StephenGPost.com. So StephenGPost.com. And the Institute is www.unlimitedloveinstitute.org. And,
Thank you so much for joining us, Stephen. Thank you, listeners. Thank you, Mad Painter. Thank you, Dr. Sasha Lessin. Much love and blessings, and aloha.
Aloha.
Aloha.